Hello there, and welcome to Oxford's Literary Talk Show. Today we are honored to have two distinguished professors, Dr. Eugene and Dr. Carlsen-Phelan. These gentlemen are experts in Romantic era literature. They're here to talk to us today about a very famous Romantic era novel, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Specifically, they would like to discuss aspects of the novel that deal with the identity of Victor Frankenstein's monster. Dr. Hahn, would you care to start us off?
Thank you, and gladly. One of the most debated topics in Shelley's Frankenstein is Victor's creation. The monster has great difficulty selecting an identity for himself. We see the possibilities for the monster's identity being limited more and more throughout the course of the novel. Eventually, the monster is forced to become the embodiment of Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost. We then see him fulfill this duty in the rest of the novel. Dr. Phelan?
Excellent observation, Dr. Hahn. We see that the monster was even born with a limitation on his opportunities, which is seen in his disgusting appearance. There's a saying that all men are born equal. Well, in this case, Frankenstein's monster certainly was not.
Very, very good point, Dr. Phelan. So the monster is born with an obvious impediment. Directly after the monster is created, we see Victor Frankenstein horrified at his own handiwork. It is Frankenstein who first attempts to impose an identity on the monster, who first refers to him as an object and demon, and eventually names him Devil, as seen in page 99 of Mary Shelley's novel. This also foreshadows the identity that the monster will take upon himself, Satan from Paradise Lost.
Indeed, indeed. And another major instance in which we see the monster's choices for identity being limited is when he finally learns the concept of language. Before he learned language, he thought of the world very abstract and conceptually. No distinct thoughts occupied his mind, all was confused, as he said in his own words. However, when the monster actually learns language, he's only able to attribute words and ideas to a set number of things, because the vocabulary of language is limited. There's not a word for everything in the universe. He had wrongly assumed that if he became a master of their language, them being society, that the knowledge might enable him to overlook the deformity of his figure. Sadly, he was still intensely rejected by human civilization.
And that is the thing, Dr. Phelan. Rejection is a prevalent aspect throughout the novel that seems to reinforce the monster's difficulty in embracing identity for himself, and eventually, like you mentioned, leads to him taking on the role of Satan. As people persistently deny the monster of any interaction with them, the monster loses its trust with humankind, only supporting the idea of being Satan in the novel. The monster is limited consistently to very few options, and the possibility of peace with humans is completely shattered, as the humans themselves reject the monster. Thus, with the limitations of choice placed on it through rejection, it actually seems only fair for the monster to take on the role of the devil.
Exactly. And it can be a bit confusing to fathom how the monster immediately assumed the role of Satan. Allow me to explain further. After the fiasco in which he attempted to carve out an identity for himself in language, the monster read a very influential book, Paradise Lost by John Milton. Now, Paradise Lost as a novel has a very clear cultural identity. In the novel, it is assumed that one has free choice over who they want to be and what they shall become. However, it's really ironic that in the novel, there are only 3 different categories of characters: Adam, God, and Satan.
Right, Dr. Phelan. And Adam seems to represent God's perfect creation, and God represents the perfect being and creator, and finally Satan itself represents the rebellious and evil demon. In Paradise Lost, there are 2 possible figures for individualism, Adam and Satan. And Paradise Lost ultimately makes a claim that a person is either virtuous and wholly good, like Adam, or that person is evil and malicious, like Satan. In Frankenstein, once the monster reads the novel, he is confronted with the ultimate choice. He can assume the identity of Adam or Satan.
And this choice is one that decides the fates of all the characters in the novel as well. The monster stated to Frankenstein that he ought to be his Adam, but it is rather the fallen angel. The monster is able to identify himself with the character of Satan, and therefore his perception of himself is distorted to the point where he believes that he must fulfill the role of Satan. In the novel, he describes that because of his choice to identify as Satan, evil thenceforth became his good.
And really, the monster did not fit exactly into the characterizations of Adam or Satan. He held traits of both characters. However, once he chose an identity for himself, He adapted his nature to an element which he had willingly chosen. We see then in numerous cases where the monster must live up to his newly discovered identity. Dr. Phelan, would you please care to explain?
Gladly. The monster's choices seem to become greatly limited once he's set with the persona of Satan. Rather than the good deeds that one may expect from the life of Adam, the monster performs extremely gruesome acts that range from burning a house down of an innocent family to choking a little child to death. Everything seems to roll downhill once he's provided with knowledge from Paradise Lost, assuming the role of Satan thereafter he read it. Limitations, rejection, and corruption. They're all evident both in the monster and Satan. Certainly, aspects of Adam and virtue are absent in the monster after he understands his new persona.
Exactly. Also, the monster performs these horrible deeds as he seems to be incredibly angry with humankind and cannot seem to deal with his feelings of rejection, almost like Satan. The monster's plight is very similar to that of Satan's.
And specifically, we can see exactly why the monster would have been angry. In the novel, the monster had been carefully observing a family known as the DeLacy's. The monster was innocent and had not performed any evil acts on the family. However, once the family had simply looked at the monster's face, he was rejected and thrown out. They even left the house and wanted to sell it. This was the monster's final straw, and this rejection was a very significant limitation on the monster's identity.
How so?
The monster seems to be devoid of any aspect of hatred or anger, as he said to himself that it was the first time the feelings of revenge and hatred filled his bosom. The monster bent his future and mind towards injury and death completely. Shortly after, his connection to Satan is extremely evident and reinforced because the monster swears to cause fear, chiefly towards his arch enemy, because his creator had rejected him along with mankind.
And wow, I never realized that, Dr. Phelan. That's a great parallel that you pointed out between the monster and Satan. I mean, Satan himself was rejected by God in heaven, and he too desires to inflict pain and fear upon mankind.
Exactly, Dr. Hahn. Also, the monster's satanic aspect is only further towards the end of the novel. The monster's inextinguishable hatred is with the monster throughout the novel as he continues to murder more and more people. It's actually quite frightening when at the end of the novel, the monster says that he's content to suffer alone, and also that when he dies, he's well satisfied that the abhorrence and opprobrium should load his memory.
The monster seems to be completely resemble Satan by the end of the novel, Dr. Phelan. He has fulfilled his duties by murdering his family, the family of Frankenstein, and even until his death, he seems to not desire any feelings of positivity as he is satisfied with hatred being the only aspect that is left in his memory. It is actually quite sad seeing the innocent monster fall to such depths due to the limitations he experienced. It is almost as if we should be blaming the limitations in humankind for the monster's horrendous deeds. The monster is a fallen angel with its wings being clipped off progressively throughout the novel, and we can certainly see the limitations cutting its wings. The monster's opportunities and possibilities are limited due to limitations, and he is ultimately unable to fly anymore.
Indeed, the monster does fulfill his duty as Satan, and we can see through his actions, but we also can sympathize for the monster. The monster's heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and when wrenched by misery to vice and hatred, it turned into what is by the end of the novel. The monster may actually seem a lot like the nature of humans. We may strive to be accepted in society and feel in place in our communities. However, when limitations prevent us from growing and meeting new people successfully and we're rejected, we may start despising the ones who reject us, almost like the mindset of Satan and the monster.
Well put, Dr. Phelan. And now, the question of who the real monster actually arises. Thank you, and I believe Dr. Phelan and I must attend a seminar on Frankenstein and its origins in a few hours.
Alright, well, thank you for coming, and we will appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for having us. We hope that we assisted the listeners in gaining further insight of the novel. On our next podcast, we will discuss the heated debate on who is the embodiment of a monster in Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein and mankind, or the monster itself. Make sure to tune in. Listen to more podcasts at podcasts.ox.ac.uk.